The U.S. Surgeon General says that the worst of the pandemic is still ahead, and he invoked memories of dramatic events from U.S. history.
This is going to be our Pearl Harbor moment, our 9/11 moment. Only it's not going to be localized. It's going to be happening all over the country. And I want America to understand that.
The USA is now the country that's the hardest hit, no doubt about it. And some pretty big mistakes were made while the clock was ticking. Here's a list that some of the experts made about what went wrong. Mistake number 1. Back in January, the U.S. Center for Disease Control refused tests from Germany and thus lost crucial time. Even now, not everyone has access to tests. It's hard to track who is infected.
We know that it is an underestimation.
Mistake number 2, the U.S. government miscalculated and thought it had proper supplies and resources right up to the last minute.
We have tremendous numbers of ventilators, but there's never been an instance like this where no matter what you have, it's not enough.
Mistake number 3, U.S. states have been left to manage the crisis on their own. Support from the federal government has been weak.
We have a state emergency management agency, but if he were right, why would we ever need a federal emergency management agency? It's because individual states can't possibly do what the federal government can do.
But it's always easier to blame someone else. We've now got U.S. officials saying that China hid information from the World Health Organization.
A recent intelligence community report confirms that disinformation began as early as November, when it misreported the seriousness of the disease. Based on Chinese reports, there was an outbreak of a serious but not communicable disease that was easily contained in Wuhan.
The Chinese government's early handling of the disease and failure to adequately report information to the WHO breached Articles 6 and 7 of the International Health Regulations, a treaty to which China is signatory and legally obliged to uphold. These breaches allowed the outbreak to rapidly spread outside Wuhan, its place of origin.
The Chinese, nonetheless, have been lying since this started. If the Chinese had been honest from day one, if they had talked about how serious this was, then the flight bans would have started much sooner, travel would have been restricted much sooner, and the world could have really prepared for this, and we weren't. And so now we're suffering and we're losing American lives.
Now, the UK has also signed on to the plan to blame China. A British think tank recommended an international lawsuit saying that up to $4 trillion could be paid by China to just G7 countries. And that's after a $20 trillion lawsuit from some American firms.
Meanwhile, it should be pointed out that China is sending medical personnel to Europe right now and supplies to Europe. And it's sending supplies to the U.S. to fight the coronavirus. So, you know, to me, the EU and the U.S. should be grateful to China instead of inciting more hostilities.
The World Health Organization is also being accused of covering up for China.
A re-evaluation of World Health Organization leadership is urgently called for. By consistently bending to the Chinese Communist Party, from downplaying the severity of the coronavirus to systematically excluding Taiwan, it has lost the credibility necessary to be effective.
The World Health Organization is supposed to fight diseases, not coddle tyrants. We're in the middle of a public health crisis, but after Americans beat this virus, we need to have a serious reckoning with the World Health Organization.
But why would they do that? It's a pretty serious allegation to make against a vital international body that does so much important work.
The U.S. is very prone not to take responsibility for its own failures. The U.S. prides itself on being number one, the best in everything. And so when it fails so miserably as it has in this crisis, it looks for a scapegoat. In this case, it has chosen to blame China. We have an election in November, and the Trump administration is deathly afraid that if they get properly blamed for their failings, that Trump will lose. I mean, it's really as simple as that. And so they're trying to deflect blame by calling this the China virus and blaming China. And it's absurd and it's disgraceful.
The spread of the coronavirus isn't really anyone's fault. Every country wishes it had been better prepared, especially the United States, which is now the worst hit. But instead of trying to learn from their own mistakes, U.S. leaders have decided to point fingers. Caleb Maupin, RT, New York.